From Capital News, Illinois, it's a new year and a new legislative session is about to get underway. Today is Friday, January 9th, 2026. We'll talk about what to expect in the General Assembly on this edition of Capital Cast. Hello, and welcome back to Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News, Illinois. I'm Peter Hancock, wishing everyone a happy and prosperous new year. Joining me today for our first podcast of 2026 are CNI reporters Ben Szalinski and Brenden Moore. We'll also introduce you this week to our two Public Affairs Reporting Program interns from the University of Illinois Springfield, Nikoel Hytrek and Jenna Schweikert. But for now, Illinois lawmakers will soon come trickling back into the State House as the 2026 legislative session slowly gets underway. The Senate gavels in Tuesday the 13th and is scheduled to meet for 3 days next week to get things started. The House comes in the following week and will meet for 3 days starting January 20th. The two chambers actually won't both be in the Capitol at the same time until the week of February 17th, 18th, and 19th. The 18th is when Governor J.B. Pritzker is scheduled to deliver his budget and State of the State address, and that's when things really get busy. And then, of course, we have primary elections happening in March. There are members of the General Assembly running for re-election, some members running for Congress, and some are running for other state offices, so that has the potential to spice things up. Ben and Brenden, what do you see as the overarching themes going into the session? Is this going to be a year when the budget dominates the discussion, or will there be other issues, including the elections? Ben, let's start with you. What's kind of your 30,000-foot view of the session coming up?
Yeah, I think the most obvious issue going into the session is the budget itself. It's obviously the one thing we know the General Assembly has to do every year, and it's always the biggest thing and one of the most controversial. But I think this year takes on new importance because it's the first year that the state is really able to digest all the changes the Trump administration has made. A lot of the budget changes that were made that affects the state last year, those came into effect in the middle of the summer. So state lawmakers hadn't really had time to actually respond to it. They crafted a budget last May that was kind of a guess at what Republicans in Washington might do. So this year, they're really able to kind of digest that bill, see what changes they're forced to make and other changes they want to make as a result of that bill, and kind of get into the weeds on those issues. But I think it's also important because this is also the first year after a whole bunch of changes to, what kind of resources the states are able to receive. And I think it's kind of an opportunity for state lawmakers to really respond to some of the changes that we've seen as far as federal funding cuts that have come to the state. Because last spring, it was just like something new every single day, just new funding cut here, new funding cut there. We don't even know what stuck. Now we have a better idea on some of those, but of course, as we found out this week, we're still sometimes getting random funding cuts, such as $1 billion for childcare services, will just plop on the table, from the Trump administration one of these days. So I really do think the budget's the overarching theme in this kind of weird world where the state has to be flexible to respond to anything that can come its way.
Well, you're right. Last year, this time of year, it was pretty much every day was a new surprise in our email inboxes when Trump was sworn in for his second term on January 20th, and things just kind of continued happening from there. Brenden, aside from the budget, of course, the Trump administration gave us lots of surprises last year. What do you see as the big non-budgetary issues that we're going to be facing?
Well, this might be budget adjacent, but a word we're going to hear a lot this session is affordability. It's the number one issue that lawmakers hear when they're at the doors, and that's whether it's here in Illinois or nationally. Things are expensive, and people are feeling it. And as was mentioned, it's an election year. And so legislators and Governor Pritzker are going to be very attuned to those affordability concerns. So I would expect a lot of attention on issues that kind of play into that affordability message. Now, as Ben mentioned, we're kind of in a volatile place with the budget, with some of the cuts coming from the administration, and we don't know what the economy will look like and how that might impact, tax receipts coming into state coffers. So I think it's fair to say it's probably not going to be like 2022, the last time Governor Pritzker was on the ballot when uh, he and Democrats championed a bunch of one-time tax relief. Think about, the suspending the state grocery tax and the state gas tax, among other items. I'm not sure there's going to be enough room in the budget to do those types of things. But I know, every year we've seen them try to up the state's earned income tax credit. They've tried to do stuff around a child tax credit. Maybe we could see some stuff around that. The governor has also taken on a pet issue of his has been insurance reform, taking on the insurance companies. He's done that a lot with health insurance, whether it's banning junk insurance or reining in prior authorization. He tried unsuccessfully last year to push a measure through the legislature that would reform homeowners insurance after some pretty large rate hikes from State Farm. I would not be surprised to see him go for some version of that this year, try to get that across the finish line. So I think whether it pertains to the budget or maybe some of these non-budgetary topics, when it comes to, dealing with insurance companies and whatnot, I would expect those issues to really get a lot of attention and be prioritized by the governor and by the legislature, and almost maybe kind of try to have like a populist message as they go into re-election later this year.
Okay, well, Ben, let's drill down into the budget just a little bit. None of us knows yet what Governor Pritzker is going to recommend. You and I have both written a little bit about some of the early indicators. Is this going to be an easy year, a hard year? I mean, what are the budget forecasters saying right now about their expectations for the next year, year and a half?
Yeah, I would say it's going to be a hard year if you're a Democrat who wants to spend more money on programs and find new funding. Um, I think we got some news this week from the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability. That's the General Assembly's independent budgeting oversight arm. And their report was kind of a little more optimistic than I think a lot of people were looking for this year. It really showed that 6 months into the current fiscal year, the state's revenue is actually up 5% compared to fiscal year 2025. And, when lawmakers crafted this current budget, it was really based on the idea that there was actually not going to be a whole lot of revenue growth. The economy was going to be a bit more stagnant. And we really haven't quite seen that. Sales tax is still going in the positive direction, which is the sign the economy is still progressing forward and growing. Corporate taxes are continuing to be down, and that's, somewhat as a result of changes to the federal tax code that's causing the state to receive less money from corporations. So it's not as dire of a budget picture, I think, as state lawmakers had expected it may be at this point in the year. We have heard earlier a couple months ago that the governor was asking state agencies to come up with a list of budget cuts. Well, for one, we haven't seen those cuts that were proposed and submitted via executive order. But I mean, at this point, I'm not so sure that they're quite necessary because it does seem to be the revenue to fulfill the budget obligations that lawmakers passed. So in that regard, it's good. But I think, the message again from the governor this year is going to be there's not a lot of room for new programs. And a lot of people come to Springfield and are asking lawmakers for millions and millions and millions of dollars here, sometimes $1 billion for their program, new tax credits, and a whole laundry list of things. That's routine every year. But, in the last couple of years preceding Donald Trump taking office in the past year, lawmakers were able to say yes to those people a little bit more. There was more room to expand tax credits, to fund new programs for immigrant health care. Well, now that immigrant health care program no longer exists in its previous form here in the state. So I think there's going to be a lot more no said again from state lawmakers this year, but I don't know that they need to go cut off a bunch of spending either this year either.
Well, and you talked about that report from the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, what we call COGFA. And I remember that one of the big question marks that they put through that whole report was federal funding. Of course, last year, Congress passed this big budget reconciliation bill known as H.R. 1, otherwise known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. There are changes in there about food stamps. There are changes in there about Medicaid funding. And that's not even counting the random things that seem to come out of the blue, like the freezing of $1 billion in federal funding for child care and family assistance that we saw this week. How big of an impact is that bill likely to have on the budget talks? It's a huge bill, many different moving parts to it. But have you heard people talking about how the state's going to have to adjust to this sort of new relationship between the state and the federal government?
Yeah, those big main changes for the state that you mentioned on the healthcare front and food benefits, the majority of those don't take effect for another year. So lawmakers still actually have time to kind of prepare for this, which is where I think you'll see a lot of Democrats, especially the more moderate and conservative ones, the governor included in that. I would say they're going to be looking to take probably a more cautious approach to budgeting to be able to have the flexibility to absorb those new costs that are going to come in the coming years. Another $700 million for SNAP benefits is actually pretty substantial for the state. Who knows what the state's going to do about the healthcare problems, given that, we don't really know who's being kicked off quite yet and how much the state can even absorb, the cost of people who are losing health insurance from the federal government. So I think there's going to be an emphasis on preparing the state budget to be able to take on more of those costs in the coming years, which is why I think, the word no is probably going to be the most common thing a lot of lobbyists hear this year.
Okay, and Brenden, let's talk a little bit about some of the other non-budget issues that are hanging out there. For the past year since Donald Trump was sworn into his second term, the Pritzker administration has had a pretty tense relationship with Washington and with the Trump administration. We've seen that on several fronts, most notably on immigration enforcement. You've also been following a lot of the lawsuits that Attorney General Kwame Raoul has with the Trump administration. Aside from the budget and aside from federal funding streams, what do you see around the corner that might be dominating this session in terms of the tension between Illinois and the Trump administration?
We're going to see a lot of spillover from 2025, which, if it wasn't one of the most litigious years in state history, it's pretty darn close. Attorney General Raoul was earlier this week actually on Capitol Hill testifying at a shadow hearing that House Democrats put on to mark the 5th anniversary of the January 6th Capitol riot. And the Attorney General basically outlined that Illinois joined in 4 dozen lawsuits against the Trump administration.
4 dozen.
4 dozen, 48, and more than 100 amicus briefs just last year alone. And obviously, we've talked about a lot of those suits, but they include everything from cuts to congressionally appropriated funding to the state, the effort to end birthright citizenship, perhaps most notably challenging President Trump's now aborted push to deploy troops to the streets of Chicago. He had an interesting quote, said that one consistent theme throughout the 48 cases that he mentioned is that the administration ignoring what we learned in Schoolhouse Rock, which is that there are separation of powers, and that both applies at the federal level between the Congress and the executive, but also between the federal government and the states, federalism. So we're going to see a lot of that continue. President Trump is and the administration are very litigious, and a lot of these states have also responded in kind. So a lot of those suits that were initiated last year are still ongoing. There are some cases that are before the Supreme Court now that we're waiting to hear on, and others are working their way through the courts. And undoubtedly, there will be additional litigation filed on both sides of this. I think that the Attorney General's office, they were a bit overwhelmed at the beginning of this year, maybe a little more prepared this year. They did receive a funding boost in this year's budget to hire more attorneys to deal with this onslaught of litigation. So I think it'll just be something that continues to play out in the backdrop as lawmakers are meeting and crafting a budget and working on other policy items in the spring session and just into later this year as well. I don't anticipate many changes, especially with Republicans still control the Congress and have not provided a lot of pushback to the Trump administration. So won't be surprised to see a repeat of 2025 when it comes to the back and forth between the administration and states like Illinois.
Okay. Well, this will be the 8th legislative session that Capital News Illinois has covered. Each year, we partner with the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. That's a master's degree program in journalism that includes an intensive semester-long internship reporting out of the State House. This year, we're lucky to have 2 of those interns with us, Nikoel Hytrek and Jenna Schweikert. Nikoel, I want to start with you. Just tell us a little bit about where you're from and what are the issues that you enjoy covering the most.
Yeah, so I'm from Northwest Iowa, the Sioux City region, and I went to school at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And since 2019, when I graduated, I was working out of Des Moines, covering a lot of state politics, including the Iowa legislature. So some of my interests that I covered there are going to, I think, carry over here, maybe just like with a new kind of lens, maybe. Like I did a lot with reproductive rights in Iowa, and I know that the situation in Illinois is really different. So it'll be interesting to kind of do it from another side. And I've also been really interested in covering courts and legal proceedings and have a lot of background doing civil rights reporting and some environmental, energy, water quality type.
Okay, sounds exciting. And Jenna, what about you? Introduce yourself here.
Yeah, I'm from Noblesville, Indiana, and I did undergrad at Knox College. I just graduated in June of 2025, and then came straight to this program. I'm really interested in healthcare and transportation issues, but I really just kind of want to learn as much as I can. So I'm really excited to just get into the session and go to as many different committees and hearings as possible.
Okay, well, we look forward to both of your reporting as the session goes along. That's all the time we have for this edition of Capital Cast. Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a State House reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation with funding from the Robert McCormick Foundation. Until next time, on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team, this is Peter Hancock saying thank you for listening.